Here in America, our justice system is far from perfect. We have, we can, in the prisons, most of the people there are there for the crimes they've committed, but not everyone. There have been people who've done time for false convictions. These can occur from a variety of situations where you've got overly ambitious prosecutors and possibly dishonest prosecutors, bad evidence, suppressed evidence, false witnesses, incorrect witnesses, bad memories. A lot of things can happen. Bad evidence. Anyway, there's a lot of situations that can come up, and there are cases for sure of false convictions, but at least they got a trial. Jesus Christ got more like railroaded. He was given something of a trial by the Sanhedrin. He was questioned, and false witnesses were brought forward, and there was no defense attorney. And he was sent to Pontius Pilate, where ultimately he was condemned under intimidation from the witnesses to the spectacle, and so we're looking at some of the evidence in something of an appeal, a retrial of Jesus. Today we're looking at just a little bit of the evidence. We're going to look at is the New Testament reliable? Because sometimes the false trial seems to go on, and even today it seems to continue. The lies, or let me just say, the confusion continues to persist about Jesus Christ and his reliability. Is he who he says? So one way we look at this today is, you look at the Bible. Is it accurate? Because if the Bible is accurate, then Jesus is the Son of God. And so one of the ways we look at the accuracy of a historic text is called the bibliographic text, and that's one of three tests that historians used in order to gauge the accuracy of historic documents. Now, this bibliographic test looks at the latest known manuscripts and relates them to the original manuscripts, because the Bible is so old that there are no original manuscripts. The very first manuscripts have deteriorated. And now, if we compare the Bible with other historical documents that are unquestionably considered reliable based on this test, nobody questions their reliability based on the bibliographic test. It's quite interesting what we find out. For example, you look at something like the history of Theoclides. It's considered an authentic, reliable document. And so, according to the bibliographic test, well, first of all, we have to look at how many of documents are there in order to cross-check our results and compare. Well, history of Theoclides, there's less than a dozen copies, and the earliest of these are 900 AD, which is 500. There's a 500-year gap between the time of the original and the latest surviving copies, a 500-year gap. Now, that's considered reliable by historians, with a dozen copies, 500 years. Another example is the history of Herodotus. The numbers are about the same there. Or we could look at the history of Tacitus. Here we have about half a dozen survive. We have half a dozen copies, and they're dated from 800 to 1,000 years after the originals. So from the historian's perspective, these are considered reliable. Nobody questions the authenticity of these documents. Now compare that with the Bible, which is questioned by historians, and it's quite interesting to see the results, because By the way, when I say it's questioned by historians, I'm talking about a certain group of historians with certain beliefs and possible bias. Let's face it, just as when there was bias when Jesus was convicted the first time. Now, with the Bible, the earliest manuscripts of the Bible are 200 in existence, 200 to 300 years after the originals. So that's considerably, that's centuries more, that's centuries closer to the original than any other of these historical documents. And how many do we have? We noticed that History of Three Euclides have about a dozen that can be compared, and History of Tacitus about half a dozen. We're looking at 500 to 1,000 years. Yet with the Bible, the distance from the original to the oldest copies is 200 to 300 years. For example, one example of that would be the Codex Vaticanus, which is written a couple of hundred years after the death of Jesus. So this is a very, very close to the actual time of Jesus. Now, you look at the number, okay? Around 24,000 copies of ancient copies of the Bible. These are ranging from the 2nd century through the 15th century, and is very strong from the 4th century onward. But we have excellent copies like the Codex Vaticanus, right, from the 2nd century. So there you go. There's no comparison. There's no comparison in terms of, you compare 24,000 copies of the Bible with half a dozen for the history of Tacitus, and you have to wonder which has more supporting evidence. You can take these ancient documents of the Bible and completely reconstruct the Bible from them. And what it shows us is that the current Bible is entirely reliable, and that any discrepancies are minor and actually don't affect any fundamental doctrines or beliefs of Christians. So claims that the Bible has been manipulated by charlatans, it's hard to understand how such claims could even be made by anyone who's actually looked at the evidence. So based on the bibliographic test, based on whether Jesus is who he said he is, well, we just look at the Bible. If the Bible says he's the Son of God, the evidence is extremely strong that the Bible is reliable. So that's the first historic test, and we'll be looking at a couple of more in future videos. Thanks for watching. Thank you.